Hey YouTube, in this video I'm going to be talking about how to get a stronger core. The reason why you want a stronger core is because you want to be able to counterbalance the movement of your legs and a few other things, but I'll get into that. The reason being is when you sprint, you use one leg at a time, and that results in, without using your arms, your body switching side to side as you sprint. It's kind of hard to do this with just your legs, because most people watching this video probably aren't at a track, so they all outside where they can just go and try running without using their arms. But you can try to do this without using your legs, because the same thing happens. Your legs counterbalance your arms and your arms counterbalance your legs. So if you just move your arms without using your legs, you are going to go side to side, or with your arms case, you're going to twist like this. And the core's job is to prevent this from happening. So it's to prevent your body from going side to side, which is done with your core and your arms, and to prevent your body from twisting like this, which is done with literally just your core. There's no other than like the rest of your upper body muscles, there isn't really anything else other than your back that's really working to make sure that you don't twist. So you need to make sure that your core is solid enough to make sure you don't twist. And this is twisting this way and side to side, because every single time you do that, force you generate is being dispersed, which could have been used to propel you forwards. Another core function of the core is to lift up the hip flexors as well. Whilst the hip flexors lift up themselves, the core and the hip flexors are, well, the abdominals and the hip flexors are connected to each other. So if you have a strong hip flexors, you have a strong core. And if you have a strong core, most likely you have strong hip flexors. Well, this one isn't as guaranteed, because you still need to strengthen your hip flexors separately. If you focus on strengthening your hip flexors, that's directly going to strengthen your core. And there's an obvious reason for that. And another reason why you want a strong core is because the stronger your core is, the easier it is for you to maintain high hip flexion. So what I essentially mean when I say that is being able to get a higher knee raise for longer with less effort, essentially. So now you might be thinking, okay, so how do I actually train the core? But before we can even get into that, we need to actually understand what the core is, because the core isn't abs, and abs is technically the core, but it's not. Reason being is there's different layers to your abdominal muscles. And when we talk about the core, we talk about the most inner layer of the abdominal muscles, the one you cannot see. And the reason why we mentioned that one is because that is the strongest one that you have, and it's the one that directly supports the majority of your body's movement. The stronger that core is, the better you're going to be able to function, which is why we call it the core. The abs is the outermost region and the outermost regions. If you focus on strengthening your core, you're going to be able to strengthen these outermost regions anyway. But if you focus on strengthening these outermost regions, you won't be able to really strengthen your core. You'll be able to make minor adaptations, but once your body is used to these movements, you're not really going to be able to get any more benefits from the core into the core. So essentially doing stuff like the plank or sit-ups, crunches, that's not really doing anything for your core. So it's essentially not the best thing you could be doing. You'd be much better off doing other things. So if you want to strengthen your core, it makes a lot more sense to focus on exercises that directly attack your core. And it is possible to get abs without doing sit-ups, crunches, or any of the other stuff, purely because athletes don't really do that stuff, but they focus on strengthening the core, which allows them to have abs, even though they don't focus specifically on hitting the uppermost regions or lowermost regions. They focus on what's inside. And the way they do that is by strengthening their hip flexors through hip flexor movements. So having a resistance band and literally pulling it with, like, putting it around your foot and squeezing your hip flexors up, one leg, or your unilaterally or bilaterally, whichever one you want, that will also help strengthen your core. You can do that. Another one, probably the best one you can do, is the pull-off press. You can do isometric holds, or you can literally do it whilst moving. I don't have any resistance bands around me, so you're going to have to go watch a separate video on how to do a pull-off press. But it's great for anti-rotational movement, which as a sprinter is essentially one of the main focuses you want the core to be able to do, to resist rotation. So the pull-off press is one of the best movements you could do to strengthen your core. And 3 sets of a minute is, if you're doing holds, is a crazy amount of loads. You can do this every day as well, which is great. It's a crazy amount of load, but if you keep doing it over and over and over again, your body will adapt and you will get stronger. And what I really like about the movement is once it gets easy, all you need to do with the resistance band is step out a bit further and continue doing the movement. And then you've automatically just upped the weight instantly, which is great. Other than the pal-off press, there's a decent amount of other things you can do. Like the things that come to mind right now is stuff in the gym, because whenever you use a weightlifting belt, you put the weightlifting belt around your core area, and this is the brace, purely because your core isn't strong enough to sustain the weight. So if you practice being able to do no belt squats, for example, this would strengthen your core, which is another great way to be able to build abs without ever actually focusing on abs. When I had the best looking abs of this season, which I had it in the off season, I'm not sure if I still have it, or definitely not to the same degree. I didn't really do any core work. Reason being, sit-ups hurt my back, and I didn't really do anything else that was really qualified as core. And recently I started doing pal-off presses. So the abs I had was purely generated from doing compound movements, because the core has to support the entirety of your body whilst you're doing compound movements in ways I'm not going to really go into too much detail in, but making sure you do these compound movements without any support is a great way to be able to strengthen your core. For example, I was doing weighted pull-ups, weighted dips, squats, at deadlifts, though I rarely ever did heavy deadlifts without a weightlifting belt for obvious reasons because of injury. But when you're doing Olympic weightlifting, I never really used a weightlifting belt unless I was going for numbers that are really close to my max, because it's a great and easy way to train my core in an explosive manner, really similar to sprinting. So I never really put on a belt unless I absolutely needed to a point where it's like, if I don't wear this belt, I'm going to injure myself, which was usually, it was about something like 10% away from so 90% of my max. That was when I slapped on a belt. So anything lower than that, I wouldn't even consider using a belt unless my form wasn't really behaving how it should be, where I'd be like, okay, I need to put on a belt for this. So when you're in a gym, spend as little time as you can from a belt, but make sure that when you do that, you understand that you will probably not be able to do your maximums with that you was able to do with a belt, without a belt. So start from a low number and just work, not too low, but a relatively low number, work your way up and feel it out to the point where it's like, this is a safe point where it's really heavy, but I'm able to do this without using a belt, because you don't want to go too heavy and potentially mess up your back because of the fact that you didn't have a belt on and you went too heavy because you was trying to do this. So make sure you always take your own health into consideration. And that's partially part of the reason why I don't really like using machines, because machines don't allow you to use your core during the movements, whilst using just a barbell will allow you to activate your core, which will allow you to get extra core work without having to actually do core exercises. Though making sure you still do core exercises is important. But if you actually want to get a stronger core, you want to make sure that the movements you do when it comes to core are explosive and they're very unbalancing, because the core's one of the main focuses of the core is to balance, essentially. So if you was going to do the plank, for example, moving around whilst you're doing the plank, where it's like you go from having both arms on the floor to one arm and stuff like that, or just where you go from having your elbows to the ground to being in a push-up position, stuff like this, whilst it's not a too crazy of a change, it can help you to activate your core in a more unstable manner, because your body's turning from side to side and has to try and stabilize to prevent yourself from falling over. And the more unilateral movements you do, the more this will occur, because when you have both arms or both legs, you're stabilizing, because you're only really able to twist. You're not really able to twist, in fact, to be honest. That's partially part of the reasons why bilateral movements are much easier than unilateral movements. But when you have just a unilateral movement, for example, say you was to try and do a one-arm pull-up. If you ever tried to do one, or a chin-up, then you'd understand that when you do it, the chin-up maybe not so much, but if you try to do a pull-up, you'd grab it like this, but then you'd suddenly twist like this. And you might wonder why that's happening. And that's because your core isn't able to sustain you staying in this position without twisting. And that's because now, usually when it's doing pull-ups, it just needs to go up and down and make sure that you stay stable in that position. So you're not wobbling or anything, you're just stable. But when you have just one arm, your body has to make sure, well, your core has to make sure that you don't rotate in basically 270 degrees, because that's the most we're really able to rotate before you consider, okay, this is it, let me move my arm. So you have about 270 degrees where you're now able to rotate, where before probably wasn't really able to rotate by more than about 20 to 30 degrees. And if you were rotating, you was forcing it. So now your body has to try and compensate by using other muscles. But if you're able to make it stay stable with your core, then just like that, you'd be able to see the instant changes to your sprinting when you go back onto the track. Because if you're able to stay stable with just with a unilateral movement such as that, it doesn't have to even be pull-ups, it could literally be squats having better transfer, because partially part of the reason why I'm destabilized is because of your legs, and the majority of the reason, in fact. So if you was able to stay in a straight position whilst you're doing squats, which is obviously slightly easier, but if you was able to stay directly in front of you whilst you're doing squats, you could understand how you'd be able to have better improvements when you're on the track, because your core is able to focus less on balancing you and more on producing force into the ground, which is why we even want a stronger core. Because when your core isn't strong, the energy gets dispersed, like I said, but you also limit the amount of force you produce. Reason being is your body doesn't want to end up twisting and essentially just flying over into one direction, which is why if you try to swing your arms now, whilst you're just not using your arm, but not using your legs and sprinting, you're able to swing in a much more violent manner, purely because your body understands that even if it twists, it's not really going to have to go anywhere, and it's just your arms. So even if you twist 360 degrees, there's not really going to be much of a detriment. But with your legs, there's a much bigger detriment, because your legs can actually move. Your legs are actually moving you and engaging a lot more muscles, to the point where if you was to produce too much force, like you would be able to move just your arms, there's a good chance you might fall over or injure yourself. So your body has to limit yourself. But if it doesn't have to focus so much on balancing, it's able to produce more force, you could easily understand how that would allow you to sprint faster. If you like my video, let me know in the comments section below. Check the description, because anything I forget to say in the video, I always put in the description. And if you like my content, subscribe, helps the channel out a lot. I post every 2 days at 1 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. If you don't know when that is, just hit the bell and then you'll be notified instantly.